welcome our special guest for today's live stream. Two comrades that we've had on the show before and are super excited to welcome back, this time to talk a little bit about Dr. Cornel West 2024 campaign for the presidency. He initially launched as a People's Party candidate, which we were quite confused about and quite critical of, and has now switched over to the Green Party, a switch that we, welcomed and celebrated here at the Vanguard, given the fact that they have ballot access and it's not a totally dysfunctional party mired in scandal and allegations of abuse and worse. But either way, we have, like I said, two very special guests here, Afeni and Renee. Super excited to get them in here to talk a little bit about all of this. Welcome back to the Vanguard, both of you. It's so great to be joined once again by you.
Hello, friends.
How are you guys?
Renee.
How are you all doing?
Doing good. Had a little bit of a rough start to the day. My transmission fucked up on my Fiesta. You're lucky you live in New York. I don't know if you have a car, Renee, but I always fantasize about living in New York just for the one reason of like not having to drive a car. But anyways.
Yeah, that all sounds good until you have to get somewhere that's really far from where you're starting. And then you realize that you may not have to be in the car, but you're going to be on the train for 2 hours. And that's not really that fun either. So
yeah, fair enough. The grass is always green.
So yeah, and living in DC, Chad, I got my car impounded and everything. You don't want these problems. These city problems? Hell no.
Yeah, bro, it's crazy. For the longest time, Kansas City had the worst traffic enforcement. It was tight. There's like a meme if you go to the KC subreddit about like how nobody has tags on their cars. They just have the like temporary tags for like years and years and years because it's like the parking people never enforced anything. And this year they cracked down on it so hard that I got like a half a dozen tickets and I had to finally go to the DMV and sort that shit all out for the first time in my entire life. But this is a massive aside and not what you guys came here to talk about. How much we all hate the parking enforcement in this fucking country, regardless of what city we live in. But I was super excited to get you guys together to talk about the announcement rather that Cornel West would be seeking not the presidency via the People's Party, but rather participating in the Green Party primary. And if you guys both want to take a turn, kind of giving your initial thoughts on that, your reaction as well as any, skepticism or praise or anything like that, feel free. The floor is yours.
I'll let you go first, Renee, because I talk a lot.
There you go, throwing me out there. I mean, so obviously I'm really glad that it's not with the party that shall not be named, because it's not actually a party. But I'm still waiting for like the full website with the details about what exactly the campaign is going to be about. I'm still waiting for the announcement to come off of the People's Party page. I'm trying to understand why his campaign committee has chosen Wells Fargo as their bank that they're going to use for the campaign, because that just blows my mind.
Can you quickly talk a little bit more about that, Renee, about the Wells Fargo thing? I wasn't familiar with that.
So, and this is my own nosiness, of course, that causes this to happen, right? If I didn't dig so much, I wouldn't find anything. So the Form 2 for the FEC, you have to put which bank you're going to be using for your campaign funding. And they put Wells Fargo, which for some people might not mean anything, but if you are following along at all with Cop City and what's happening down in Atlanta, you would know that Wells Fargo is one of the banks that funds the Atlanta Police Foundation, which funds Cop City. And so we're not even going to go into the history of Wells Fargo and all the stuff that comes with that bank in general. So to me, I'm not a big fan of that idea, but obviously I'm not part of the campaign, so
Can I ask one more follow-up question, Renee? Because we always have you on whenever there's something that has to do with like taxes or financial information or something. Because I'm like, Renee will know the answer to all of my fucking questions. I'll have no idea what I'm looking at. Even if somebody be like, look at these documents, I'll be like, I need to send them to somebody like Renee so that she can look at these guys. So you talk about. So to me, I'm like, if you were to present this information to me neutrally, right? And my first gut reaction would be, oh well.
I don't know, if it's Cornel West doing it, they probably have to use a national bank like Wells Fargo. It's probably like them or like JP Morgan Chase or like, so like in an ideal scenario, what were some of the alternatives that they would have had to that? And just because I think it's a lot of our like textbook example, do you know how Bernie Sanders banked? And was it, anything different? Was he, with like a local credit union in Vermont, that gives
right.
you, or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, and it's not an unfair question because, listen, I'm picky. I'm not going to act like I'm not picky. I am very picky. But there are two banks that are associated with the Atlanta Police Foundation, and they happen to be the two that you named, Chase and Wells Fargo, right? So that leaves a lot of national banks that are not involved with Cop City and the Atlanta Police Foundation. And the only reason that stood out to me is because when he was on Black Power Media, Kamau Franklin made a point of asking him to represent Stop Cop City and to bring it up if there was opportunity to do so. And he agreed to do it, which I thought was a great, that's awesome. Like, great. I'm looking forward to hearing you say that. But then to see Wells Fargo on the forum, to me, if you're agreeing to speak out against Cop City, then why are you banking with a bank that's funding Cop City? Right? Like these are like the little small, like, I wish people were paying more attention, right? Because I always look like the crazy person because I pay so much attention to the details. But I pay so much attention to the details because I feel like these are the small things that, that should make a difference. Like, these are the small things that separate you, right? Like, if Bernie Sanders is doing it, that doesn't make it okay. That actually means you shouldn't be doing it because you wouldn't be doing the thing that people in the duopoly and, whether he's an independent or not, he always sides with the Democrats. So whether, to me, the whole point of breaking the duopoly and trying to do something different is to actually do something different. If you're going to try and re-engage people who don't want to be engaged with the duopoly, who don't already want to be engaged with electoral politics, who already take issue with all the things that are happening, the best way to do that is to not do the thing that these people are already doing. So if you're going to jump on board and you're not doing the little detailed things that people like me pay attention to, then where are we going with this?
No, I think that's very fair. And honestly, sometimes a little bit of an early way to tell which way the ocean's going to break, right? Which way the tide's going to go. And it's always a bummer too, because it's like we're all so eager to get excited about a person, particularly like Dr. West, right? Somebody with such a long standing history of showing up, and being the guy that's going to, take the hard stand. I mean, even so recently in his career, the man was denied tenure, for his position on Palestinian rights. I mean, this isn't, a guy that they just like that somebody plucked off the street, for lack of a better word. I think that there's an instinct among activist communities to give the guy the benefit of the doubt, when in reality, if he's seeking higher office, we have to be willing to scrutinize him. And I think that, you brought up how we have to do something different than Bernie Sanders. I think that's one of the things that we have to do differently than Bernie Sanders, right? Which is that you can support a candidate while also maintaining a skepticism, while also always, being critical and looking for the proof in the pudding. And I think that perhaps, Bernie Sanders, obviously hindsight's 2020, but he kind of revealed his hand and his playbook before, a lot of us decided to, realize it. He said what he was going to do all along. He said he was going to support the Democratic candidate. He said he was going to campaign as hard as he could. In 2016, he did more rallies for fucking Hillary Clinton than Hillary Clinton did for Barack Obama. Anyways. So yeah, I think that's a great and fair point.
Right. And I don't want people to misunderstand. What I always get is, well, what's your problem? I don't have a problem, right? Like, I'm not against anybody. I'm not saying don't run. I'm not saying, like, that's not my point. My point is, you can't just get excited and say, oh, we're all in, and then not take the time to ask the same questions that you would ask if it was somebody you weren't excited about. Because that's how we get in these problems all the time, is we get excited about somebody and we fail to do that due diligence, to ask those questions that should be asked, to make sure that you're not falling into another trap. So I'm perfectly fine to be the bad guy and to be the one who does the due diligence and the one who pokes around in the forums and who's always asking the questions, because I feel like they should be asked. And I'm okay I'm okay being the dubious one, right? I hope that it's proved wrong. I hope that somebody calls his attention to Wells Fargo and he says, let's change banks, right? But we don't know what's going to happen. So we just have to wait and see.
Yeah. Just first of all, hi to all my friends in the chat. Hello, I saw y'all. One thing I will say is like, I mean, there's really like no ethical bank in America. Like a lot of these banks fund the military industrial complex. A lot of these banks have been, Wells Fargo, of course, as we know, was slave brokerage, slave insurance. You see what I'm saying? And they're not the only ones that have done stuff like that. Just because they're the ones with the most like visible history of it doesn't mean anything. So, I mean, I know it's going to sound, because I organize with Stop Cop City people. I do a lot of national organizing with that. I know it's going to sound a little fucked up, but I don't really care that much about the Wells Fargo thing. Because at the end of the day, like, Cornel West is the only candidate that is truly supporting all of the leftist values, like, wholeheartedly. Even like there's a lot of support for RFK Jr., for example. And not to say that, I mean, there are definitely things that I deeply disagree with him on, but especially his stance on Israel and Palestine. Same thing with Marianne Williamson. I told Marianne to her that I can't support you if your views on Palestine don't get better. So I think that at this point on the left, I feel like we just need to kind of rally around the person that is actually like in line with us, and whatever are there, definitely things to criticize for every single person that is participating in the electoral system. Absolutely. But I mean, if I'm gonna, if I'm gonna support anybody out here, I'm definitely gonna support Dr. West. I was probably always gonna support him, whether he I was always going to vote for him, whether he continued to run with MPP or if he switched to the Green Party, simply because I was not voting for Joe Biden. I'm not voting for RFK Jr. So for me, the switch was definitely, it brought me a lot of peace, to be able to say okay, I can go volunteer with them. I can give them money and trust that it's not going to go into that little man's pockets. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying not to call him all the words I want to call him on this stream. But yeah, that was my main concern, really, was number one, having a candidate that was actually going to be on the ballot, whether or not he decided to do a writing campaign or whatever. I think that this is the left's chance to actually take advantage of the socioeconomic stress that's happening in this country. I was actually watching y'all stream earlier when y'all were talking about, not the one that y'all are doing today, but one that you did, I think 3 days ago, when, you're talking the Tim Pool thing and about how violence is unique in America, and violence, there's a cultural issue with violence as well as a physical issue with violence in America, which is the reason why you on top of impoverished people and all that stuff, the poverty and all that stuff that contributes to violence, but we also have more guns than people in this country. We also have, just a very stark disconnection between each other. And so, I feel like Dr. West is a candidate that can talk about those issues, that can actually, and if he was to become president, he would actually address socioeconomic issues. He would actually address the cultural violence in this country, because it isn't just the things that we do within our borders, but we are a violent country, overall, globally. So I feel like that bleeds into how this country, how we interact with each other, the hyper individualism, and not actually having intentional community building, not knowing your neighbors. It's a lot harder to shoot somebody in the face if you know them and you know their mama, and you know their grandma and them, but we don't have those connections. So, I feel like if there's anybody that is currently running in the, the 2024 electoral cycle that could actually speak to those issues, and if there's anybody who was president who could actually address those issues, I feel like it would be Dr. West, definitely.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Afeni. I'm wondering what both of you guys think about the idea of the dirty break strategy. You just brought up RFK Jr. and Marianne Williamson, Afeni, who are both running in the Democratic Party primary. And Zach and I were hoping specifically that Marianne would do the dirty break after, losing the nomination to Joe Biden. But now that Cornel West has jumped in the race, we do have a third party candidate to vote for, regardless of whether or not Marianne decides to do a dirty break strategy or anyone else running in either of the primaries decides to do that. But what do you guys think about Cornel West running in the Democratic Party primary with the explicit promise to do a dirty break after Joe Biden wins the nomination again? A lot of people have pointed out that the Green Party nominating process won't conclude until like a year from now. So assuming that Cornel West does win that nomination, he won't actually truly be able to start his campaign for about another year, versus if he was participating in the primary, he would have more access to the media, more attention would, have to be paid to him just as a result of him running through those channels. Just interested if you guys have any thoughts on that subject.
So, well, I mean, Renee knows I organize in Prince George's County, Maryland. So like the work that I'm currently doing, I work with a lot of like Black folks that are deeply entrenched in the Democratic Party. The only benefit that I would see for Dr. Cornel West running the Democratic Party is like what you're saying, of course, like the media attention, all that stuff. I mean, I feel like he already has a good amount of like name recognition, like even niggas that, either way, even motherfuckers that don't know, sorry, I'm gonna cuss y'all. I can't help it. Even motherfuckers that don't know like exactly who he is or like what his history is, they know his name. And I think that's really important. And I think that what the benefit of him running the Democratic Party would be is I think that it would lend him more credibility to some of these like more like quote unquote normie Democrats that like people that live in Prince George's County, Maryland, that are very much, they're very much Biden or bust, but they're also open to listening to alternatives. They're open to hearing alternative opinions. So that's the only that's just in my personal experience. I just think that especially for Black people, it would have just been better and easier for them to digest if he had actually ran through the Democratic Party.
So you think there's more pros than cons essentially to a strategy like that?
I think the con is that he, because there's this contingent on the left that as y'all know, I used to be a part of RBN. There is a contingent on the left that if you have a D next to your name, they're not gonna fuck with you regardless. So that there is a con to that.
Wait, but can I ask you something, Afeni?
Yeah.
So obviously you're on the ground, a lot. You're in the activist circle, you see how the sausage is made. How much of that sentiment do you experience in activist circles? Because from my very limited and outsider perspective in Kansas City, I'm not a fucking saint, right? But like my experience that I do have with the activist circles that run here is that they're very tactical people, right? If they see a guy that they know is like the fucking real deal, like they're going to be like, look, dude, this sucks, but you got to fucking do this. Okay, pull the trigger. We're trying to get X, Y, and Z done. I don't care about your feelings. Like that's more of the like on the ground activist sentiment, whereas like it's primarily in like our neck of the woods on YouTube where it's like, oh, if you've got a D next to your name, I'm just not going to do it, because that kind of gratifies the right-wing audience that I think a lot of people have culminated in. And I mean I understand there are so many valid reasons not to vote for the Democrats. I'm not saying that's everybody that feels that way. I just think that there is a contingent of that, and I haven't seen that sentiment nearly as often. I mean, almost never in like actual activist groups where I'm at, but I'm in the middle of the country. So I didn't know in a place like DC, do you see more of that sentiment where there's just, from people who are firm leftists just saying like, I don't care what the tactical advantage is. I'm not going to support somebody that runs as a Democrat, even if they have a pedigree like Cornel West.
So I'll say this. I sit on a electoral justice table for the Movement for Black Lives. So, we did have a conversation about who we want to support, because that cohort especially, there's just a lot of like canvassing capacity. These are local, like these are a national a national coalition of locally based orgs that door knock, do all the things, and have the capacity to support a candidate and also like have influence in their local communities, especially and local Black communities. And I will say that, I mean, there were conversations about Marianne Williamson. There were conversations, I mean, no, like, I'm gonna be real, like, nobody that I'm organizing with who's Black. There are lots of white folks that I organize with that support RFK Jr., but nobody I'm organizing with who's Black is really fucking with RFK Jr. Just because of, like, you know, there was a lot of like vaccine like pushing in the Black community, and especially so like they are not going to support somebody who espouses anti-vax views. So I will definitely say that I wouldn't say that it's like how it is on the internet. I always I'm trying to watch my words. I would say that a lot of what I see on the internet
is fake.
On a lot of different channels does not represent what activists that are on the ground, that are doing the work, are doing and saying and thinking. Because at least and I've always been a harm reduction baddie, you feel me? So a lot of us talk about what it looks like to reduce harm in the current moment. Because while, yes, we know, like, I'm an abolitionist, I want all this shit to be gone.
That's because you're actually out there doing the work, right? Like, and I just wanted to like underscore that, because it's like everybody that wants to pretend that they're the most radical on the internet has the exact opposite philosophy of all of the most practically radical people I know in my real life. Like the good people on the ground that I'm like fortunate enough to bump into on occasion, right? Those are the people that are like, hey, guys, we're all eating shit right now. Here is the small wins that we can get. Now let's plan for our long wins while we get some short ones, right? I like the KC Tenants folks. Do you think they like Mayor Quentin Lucas in Kansas City? No. But are they gonna, show up and push the guy and be there and negotiate with him and push the? Of course. And they're not just gonna be like, I'm not talking to that guy because he's a Democrat in a suit. Like that would be ridiculous. It would be ridiculous. You know what I mean? And I just feel like it's important for everybody that's listening, exactly what you said, Afeni, which is that in your experience, as in our experience, and I'll ask Renee the same question, but I would bet my last dollar in her experience too. The activist perspective is radically different than the holier than thou podcaster perspective.
So what I'll add is I'm more likely to encounter people who just won't vote rather than say like, I'm never going to vote for this one and never vote for that one. Like people, they don't want to take the day off of work. They don't want to be bothered. I mean, my mother is like, I don't think I'm voting this year, right? And like, she's over it. She's over the whole thing. She's 70 years old. She's never not voted since she became a citizen. And she's like straight up over it. So I encounter that way more, I think, than this idea that like people are paying attention to the letters, right? People are recognizing that the system does not work. And so you have a decision to make at that point. You can either try to play the system to your advantage as best as you can, or you can completely separate yourself from the system and do what you can outside of its grip so that you can survive, right? And so I see a lot more of that than I see anything else. So what happens is in these districts where people are like, oh, they're so crazy, they're running them. Like the people who choose to vote, right, because they've decided they're going to stick with the electoral politics. If they're Democrats, they're going to vote Democrat. So I always find myself in these conversations where people are like, oh, that's crazy. Why would they run Democrat? Da, 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 da. And I always wonder, like, do you have any idea what that district looks like? Do you have any idea what the population is? Do you have any idea what happens when people go to the polls? Like, it's not what people sell you on these podcasts, right? It's really like people go there because they're a Democrat and they just vote under whatever D says. Like they're not even half the time. I would bet money the majority of people don't even know who the person is when they're voting. They're just going with whoever's on their ballot line. So, one of the things that in the multiple conversations that I've had with people who are contemplating running or whatever have you, is I almost feel like your better pursuit is the person who's not voting, right? The person who's given up, who doesn't want to be bothered, who feels like it's a waste of time because they're not linked to anything right now. Like they're not just going to go in and blindly check the box for whoever is, on the ballot line that they align with. They might actually have that conversation. So I don't want to make a decision about the dirty break thing. I feel like in some ways that might not work because the system, like with mainstream media and the way everything is set up, like it's just so like nasty and messy. Like I just don't know how that would all play out. But the one benefit that I wish I would hear the Green Party say is that they're going to use this opportunity of a primary to get people to invest in a third party process, right? Because maybe you can get people to understand that there are political parties who are willing to primary no matter how popular the person is that's running under their party, right? You can have people have a conversation. You can actually have debates. You can actually have people go out into the streets and talk, because while they're trying to determine who is going to be the presidential candidate, they still have to get ballot access. They still have to talk to people. They still have to collect signatures. There's a whole process that has to happen in every state where there is not ballot access already in order for them to even be on the ballot if it's possible in that state. Now, be mindful, there's some states that require that you run in the previous, the previous full state election, whatever that was, governor or whatever have you. So I'm trying to remember, it's like 11 states that have that requirement. So I don't know if Green Party ran somebody in all those states for governor or for some kind of statewide seat. So there may be places where they cannot get on the ballot, right? So all of these things are going to require an on-the-ground movement, people having conversations, talking to people, and you might be able to gain some people who are willing to sign on with the Green Party just so they can vote in the primary because they like Cornel West, right? Like there's a window to advancing what the Green Party is trying to do through this method if they do it properly. Now, I'm not on any national committee for Green Party, right? Like I'm a high school guidance counselor. Like I don't have any say in any of these things, but I feel like that would be the way to go, right? Like use this as an opportunity to actually build the third party so you have some chance of doing something when it comes time for people to vote in 2024. But I think a lot of times I find that people are so obsessed with we're going to go talk to the Trump voters, or we got to go talk to the Democratic voters, and you're missing a whole group of people who have basically blew the system off because they can't be bothered. And you might actually get some gain with those people if that's where your focus was.
Yeah. And also, like, I think that what makes Cornel West's campaign so viable is the fact that there are so many independent voters in this country, people that are not voting at all in this country, that because they're not hearing people talk about socioeconomic issues, not hearing people talk about the things that actually affect them on the day-to-day, that's why they're not politically engaged. Now, I will say that, unfortunately, like no matter how you chop it up, because this is something that I ran into like organizing in like Maryland, is that there are a lot more Black people, especially because I'm gonna be real. I organize for Black folks. You feel me? I organize for Black liberation. I believe it'll liberate everybody. They are really stuck in the voter cycle. You see what I'm saying? Like they don't see any other, they don't understand any other theory of change. And so while yes, we are doing everything that we can on the ground to push people towards like more direct service, push people towards actually like, more adversarial politics, we have to meet people where they're at. And I think that the biggest issue that I see at this point is that there is a certain contingent of people that are just like, well, fuck it all, burn it all down. But the base of people that they're actually trying to do that for are not there. You know what I'm saying? So it's not to say that the fuck it, burn it all down is wrong. Because, burn all this shit to the ground. You feel me? But in the same breath, we have to realize that a revolution isn't just 10 people. It's not just, 100 people. Like that's a good contingent of folks that we need to mobilize to do like the more radical work that we'd want to do. Right now, where we're at currently in reality is that there are many people that want somebody to vote for. So where I see the biggest opportunity is trying to, yes, flip some of those Democrats that are looking for more socioeconomic issues to be addressed to like a Cornel West campaign, and also making outreach to those people who may be libertarians but registered as independent, who may be like voted for Obama in 2012, voted for Donald Trump in 2016, voted for Biden in 2020. Like there's so much ideological like diversity amongst independents that I think that Cornel West is someone who can not only grab a good chunk of those voters, but also, get Black voters to actually support and listen to his message as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Afeni. And I think Renee is totally correct to, identify the extreme voter apathy that the left is up against, because you're totally right. There's a large portion of the population that probably has a lot of progressive ideas, but they've just kind of given up on voting for the very valid reason that they've probably voted many times and it hasn't really improved their life. They haven't seen the effects of that in their communities. And they're at the point where they just don't think it's worth the time of day to go, drive to the voting station, make sure you're registered, go through all the hoops. They make it hard in a lot of places, Kansas City included. And I'm just wondering what you think Dr. Cornel West can do as a presidential candidate, or if he can do this. It's an open question. We'll see if he's able to, but if he can reach and mobilize those voters and actually, convince them that casting a vote for Dr. Cornel West as a Green Party candidate will improve their lives. Do you think that's something he's going to be able to convince people of? Because it's obviously been a struggle for Green Party candidates in the past, not only to convince non-voters, but to convince just regular voters that it's worth their vote to vote Green. So, what do you think strategically he can do differently besides just being Cornel West, obviously an immensely charismatic person? What do you think he can do to convince those swaths of the population that it's actually worth voting for him?
I think that I genuinely believe that Cornel West is somebody who actually gets outside and gets on the ground and talks to people. Like there are some people that have met Cornel West in the most random of places, on top of the fact that he taught a bunch of different classes at Harvard and Princeton. Like there are like, I'll probably say hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who know who he is, not just because they possibly sat in his classroom, but also because he is somebody who has been on television. He was an Obama surrogate. He was also a Bernie surrogate. So I think that the best thing that Cornel West can do is continue to be himself and continue to like meet people on the ground. And the thing that the Green Party needs to do is be very intentional about their local outreach. I did meet with this was like in 2022, I believe. I met with the Green Party here in DC. Their local chapter, and like they're very, very active. They do have like good membership participation in this local chapter. But I am wondering like what their strategy is going to be for like door knocking, like what kind of like mailers and stuff they're going to send out, because mailers are important in presidential campaign. Mailers are important in any campaign, honestly. And like, how are they doing targeted outreach to the people that they actually want to touch? And if you're thinking about people that don't have access to the internet, because I mean, a lot of the voters that he would need to touch are not people that have access to broadband and all that stuff as well. Like having a good ground campaign in places and like the Rust Belt in the Midwest. And I see people in the chat talking about some like, oh, we don't want to deal with libertarians and all those stuff. A lot of those people are going to be some people that would be the people that would help Cornel West win a presidential election. So like we can't get in. I'm not in binary thinking of this person doesn't agree with me on every single thing. Are there hardline issues that I definitely will not cross? Absolutely. But I'm not about to sit up here and say that this contingent of voters is untouchable simply because they don't agree with me on every single cultural issue that I care about,
Yeah. And honestly, a lot of libertarians, I feel like just normal people who identify as libertarian, I feel like it would just take them a little bit of nudging, a little bit of convincing to turn them into leftists, right? Because a lot of libertarians are really just anti-establishment people that hate the establishment, they hate the government for good reason, right? And sometimes that gets misdirected into a economic libertarianism, and they get brainwashed into thinking that regulation is bad and that corporations should rule the show instead of the government. But a lot of these folks, they want to smoke legal weed, they want the ability to, get an abortion. They want personal freedom. That's what, being the definition of being a libertarian is. And I think that you're absolutely correct, Afeni. Dr. Cornel West, with his message of liberation for the people, could totally sway some of those voters.
And you're right. I mean, the reality of the fact is Dr. West is on the right side of a lot of issues, right? Like well, people mistake my questioning as like, you don't like him, you're against him. It has nothing to do with that. I'm just a detail person, right? I work in reality. So when I bring up the things I bring up, it's because these are the things that will trip you up long term, right? If you're not paying attention to the small details, the small things that people are going to pick apart, because you're just not paying attention, because you're letting someone else run the show, or because you didn't tell somebody to stop doing something that you didn't want them to do, these are things that can become problematic later. So I'm all about reality. That said, his focus, the things that are important to him, like focusing on poor people, focusing on the lack of healthcare, focusing on stop destroying other countries with imperialism and war, and spending money on things that we shouldn't be spending money on, like looking at the homelessness. There are so many things that he talks about that when I listen, I'm like, yes, that's what needs to be said. But that's what needs to get out, right? That's the information that needs to be put forth. So the trick is, how do you get that information out to these smaller pockets of people? How? Because he's one person, right? He can't go talk to 300 million people. It's not possible. So you have to have the means to spread his message exactly as he's trying to spread it from himself, by doing it through other people. So what Afeni said about the DC chapter of the Green Party is really important. I'm a Green Party member in New Jersey. I went to the meeting last night. This was part of the conversation, right? And so that has to be part of it. What is the local contingent going to do in order to make sure that the message gets out? Because in the end, part of the reason that him switching to the Green Party was so important is because he does align with a lot of those major pillars of the Green Party. Like, he aligns with peace, he aligns with, climate change, he aligns with social justice. So all of those things are things that you want people to join the Green Party for, because that's also what they support. So this is not, it's not a divergence of thought here that we're going with. But the idea is, how are you going to get that thought forward? How are you going to push that information to the people? How are you going to access the people who don't have the internet, like Afeni said? Because there's a lot, right? There's a lot of people who don't have access to things. And, we're on YouTube and Twitter and all these places. And there are people who just simply don't have the ability to access those things. So how do you talk to those people? Because that's what's going to matter. And I also, just to add, I agree with Afeni. Like, am I a fan of the Mises Caucus? No. But they're racist, right? Like, they don't represent every single libertarian, right? So he is running a national presidential campaign. He can't pick apart and be like, I'm not going to talk to this entire group of people, because how is that going to work, right? You cannot do that when you're running a presidential campaign. Now, am I on board also with the whole, like, let's organize all the racists together and try and get them to support Cornel West? I think that's idiotic. Like, they're racist. Like, they're not trying to support Cornel West anyway. But I don't know. It's just, there's a lot that needs to happen, and I haven't seen a plan. And I'd like to see a plan, and then I'd be a lot more on board with, like, being like, yeah, let's go, because I'd like to see that there's actually something in place to move forward with.
Yeah, just as a kind of, one of our probably final questions for you guys, and specifically you can start, Renee, just because you mentioned that. What are some of the specific kind of, I guess, nitpicks you have or reservations you have? What are some of the specific things you think Cornel West should do that would make you maybe more excited or more confident in his ability to be successful? And then if Afeni feels differently, she can respond.
First and foremost, I really want him to make People's Party take his face down off their website. because it is a pet peeve of mine that they are raising money for things that they have no business raising money for. And I feel like his face being on there and saying he's a candidate for the People's Party, people are going to click that donate button. And it aggravates me, right? Like, why are we allowing a group of people to collect money with your face when you have already made it very clear that you're not running with them? Afeni's right about the banks, right? Is that a nitpick? It's absolutely a nitpick. 100%. I'm okay with being that nitpicky. I'm also okay saying if he never changes it, that doesn't mean I'm not going to support him down the line. But it just means I'm going to look and see what other things is he not really paying attention to? What other small details are out there? I'd like to see how he plans on running this campaign, right? I'd like to see that when people submit a form to volunteer, that they don't just get, that random letter back, that they actually have somebody who communicates and contacts and says, okay, here's how we're going to move forward. I've
seen a couple people post that on Twitter,
right,
where they try to volunteer and it just sends them back a blank email, basically. So kind of weird.
And there's a process for the Green Party nomination, right? He has to fill out, there's a questionnaire he has to do. There's a whole set of steps. I'd like to see that move through as well. And I'd also like to see the Green Party make some clear, statement about how they're planning on gaining ballot access and how they're planning on moving forward to make sure that whatever happens next, that they have a plan in place to make sure that the campaign can actually move forward. I know that's a long list, but if you want me to be bright and shiny and saying like, yeah, this is who I'm going to support, like I need to know that I'm not jumping behind somebody who doesn't have a plan. Because what I definitely have no interest in doing is being a year from now scratching my head like, all right, everybody was all excited and what happened? Like nothing happened. Like nothing. This is going nowhere. I've already lived that. I'm not living it again.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And if anyone watching isn't aware, Renee, you were one of the original people to kind of blow the whistle about the People's Party. You were one of the first people to inform us about all the issues, dysfunction, abuse, and toxicity behind the scenes at the People's Party. And you were smeared as an op essentially by Nick Brana and the People's Party for trying to raise awareness and let people know about all of that dysfunction going on. So I think that you have, specifically the right to be upset about that. If anyone is out there being like, oh, well, why is Renee so upset about the People's Party? She was directly affected by Nick Brana, smeared by the People's Party. So yeah, I think you have all of the reason in the world to have that reservation.
Yeah, and I remember, well, Renee, you remember this when I went.
Nobody should. Oh, so yeah, I was just gonna say nobody should be okay with regular work and people giving their money to people who aren't doing anything. Like, period. Nobody should be okay with that. Like, I shouldn't be the only person who's working people shouldn't get ripped off.
For sure. Yeah, I was going to chime in about that because I do think it's fucked up that all of the money that's going to the People's Party, like you guys can, in the comment section can be like, ha ha, fuck you, they're stupid Jimmy Dore listeners, probably living on, government money, small amounts of income, oxygen tank, you guys know the whole shtick of like the poor people in America that are desperate and sending their money to like an evangelical preacher. That's the money that Cornel West is now funneling towards, that he's put his face on. So I think everybody has every right to be just like a little ashamed and embarrassed for him because he clearly has no idea, what he's. That's actually not fair of me to say. I don't want to infantilize Dr. West. He's clearly a much smarter man than I am. But you have to almost hope that he just doesn't know what the fuck is going on. But anyway, not to interrupt you, Afeni, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, Renee, you remember this back in 2021. I sat on them steps with, I can't even say his name because I promise you I'm just going to cuss. And Zenab, and we all sat and we were talking about like some of the issues that Renee had brought up to like, because we had a conversation back in 2021 about like all the different things. And I remember I talked to them and I was like, so what are y'all going to do about like the racism and all that stuff? And they had this long laundry list of things. Well, not they, really, it was just that man, child, who was like, oh, well, we're going to be doing this and reparations and all these different platforms and stuff like that. And clearly, as we saw, like in 2022, they just moved more and more towards the right and farther away from actually caring about cultural issues. So I would just say that not only has the movement for People's Party completely shown that they don't really care what activists have to say. They don't, especially Black activists, have to say. So I was genuinely surprised that Dr. Cornel West like announced with them, but also him being on their board and like he was a part of like that big summit that him and Nina Turner were that did. I think that was also back in 2021.
That was literally what launched the Vanguard as like a channel. You guys would have had like there would have been no Vanguard really in any meaningful sense if that summit hadn't happened. We were so excited about it, and then it all fell apart.
Exactly, and then I think we were all excited about it because there is a genuine energy within this country, even with some like I think it's 70% of Democrats that don't want Joe Biden to run again. And there's also like, I think it's like 60 something % of the country that would be open to a third party candidate. That has been the case for a while now. So there has been a lot of real energy towards like building a movement that is outside of the two-party duopoly. But with everything that happened with the Movement for People's Party, it just, I don't know, like I feel like they kind of sucked some of the momentum out of that. Simply because there is now like this big like split within the left coalition. I mean, that was already fractured as it is. But now you have people that who I will say are like activists who are on the ground. I'm not a huge fan of Rome. Rome knows that, but he is building his library. He is building a library. Rome is outside. I can't take that away from him, right? And there are people that are like him that would rather support a RFK Jr. or whatever. And because we can't all get on the same motherfucking page about what our principles are, what we're going to accept, what our red lines are, it's becoming increasingly difficult to organize, to have a successful left campaign, whether that is somebody who makes it past the primary in the Democratic Party, or whether that is like a third party candidate that can take like 30% of a major party's vote, like either major party, really.
What do you think it is? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're good. I was just saying, I don't know.
This is my last question for you guys, because I was about to be done and then I had this thought and I was like, well, I'll ask you guys before you leave. What do you think is the pathology of the American left? Like, we've talked about how like Americans are just fucked from jump, right, because of our culture and capitalism and the media and all that jazz. We have way more shootings than everybody else. Literally just like Kansas City, that I think we had 6 people get killed over the weekend, gun violence. Not on the news, not a big like repeatedly, right? Our culture is so fucked when it comes from that. So, but across the board, all the way to manifesting itself in ways where we just like can't get our shit together at all to help ourselves. You know what I mean? It feels like on the left where what is our pathology? We all kind of, I think, were brought to I can't speak for Renee. Renee, you're I think, older than me and Afeni are, but I, at least for me and Gavin and Afeni, I think you're about our age. We were brought to the forefront of, progressive politics by Bernie Sanders, right? And if you look back at Bernie Sanders now, he is not a perfect candidate to me. He's a candidate that I'm making like concessions to get behind. I'm going to be like, look, man, I actually don't agree with your position on Palestine here. I actually don't agree with the position that you took on, X, Y, or Z issue. But we were all as a left willing to say, hey, we haven't had an opportunity like this in quite some time. For whatever reason, lightning just got caught in a bottle and we have a movement. And then it almost felt overnight, like the nurses union endorsed Bernie Sanders. And then it was just like off to the races. And then even me as like an 18-year-old kid in, Kansas, in Johnson County, everybody's talking about this all the time. And everybody I know who is like in high school is like, bro, college for free? Fuck yeah. Like, now we can actually go to college if college is free in this country, kind of a deal. You know what I mean? But then everybody on up to the most like, seasoned leftists were like, hey, like, we got to support this guy. This is the guy. This is the guy that's managed to do it. We have lost all of that, is the long-winded thing I'm getting to. There's not like, I mean, I think that I still have some. Not to toot, I would be like, yeah, dude, that guy, he fucking dropped the ball like 3 or 4 times, but I'll still show up because it's like, it's not that hard to pull a lever. It's not that hard to, sit outside a polling station and, hand out flyers. It's not that hard to, spend an afternoon doing, a little bit to help right. It's not that difficult. I'll still do it unless they do something like really fucking horrible that I just like can't live with myself if I support them. Why did that disappear and how do we get that back is I guess my question for you guys. And not to, leave you with a big question on the way out.
So something that I've been talking to like my mentors about, and me and Bree also had this conversation as well. Just the fact that the left has like no national conferences. Like we don't all get together and talk and like be in community with each other. After Wedding Gate and all that shit, child, we had a real long conversation about how like the best way to build trust is to actually be in community with people, to meet them, to talk to them, to have debates if that's what's necessary. Like if every single time you turn around, there's some kind of libertarian conference, there's CPAC, they got all different types of things where they all just get together. You have the filmed part, of course, you see what you see on in the media and all that other crap. But then you don't think the motherfuckers going back to getting happy hour, getting drinks, talking about strategy. And I think that because there is like this kind of like power struggle between like the multiple factions of the left right at this point, like about who's right, who's wrong, where like what we're actually going to do. And because we're not actually having conversations with each other, I think that is the biggest issue. And until we can actually all get on board and sit in a room, even with people that we don't fucking like. Like sometimes you're going to have to organize people that you don't like. There are times in Prince George's County where I'm trying to push for state legislation and I have to go sit in the office of a state Democrat who I know for a fucking fact is backed by the FOP, who I know for a fucking fact does not support any of the other shit that I'm supporting. But right now we're trying to do this one thing for this bill and move this forward, right? The lack of conversation and the ability to disagree in a way that is not like vitriolic is the biggest issue. Because I promise you, if Ron DeSantis folks and the Tim Scott, Nikki Haley, and all them different factions. I mean, I don't know if Nikki Haley has any support, child. I think she's polling like 0. But if there one Nikki Haley person that's out there, I promise you that if Donald Trump or whoever the fuck becomes the nominee for the Republican Party, I promise you, them motherfuckers gonna get in line. They're gonna get behind that motherfucker and they're gonna vote for them. And it's because they have not only unity of thought, unity of action, they have unity of thought. They know what their end goal, what they want their end goal to be. The left, I think, because there are people that are like, oh, well, I can sit with the public option. And there's also people that are like, no, we need Medicare for all. And there's no conversation between those two factions. You have the pro-Ukraine left that wants to support war. And then you have the anti-imperialist left that's like, no, we should stop all wars everywhere because not only is the U.S. military the largest fucking polluter in the world, but like we just don't need to be killing children and all the other stuff in other countries. It's just we have to start having these conversations and we have to be okay with not always agreeing with everyone. But until we get on a similar page, get in the same book at least, we are not going to move forward and have any successful wins at all.
So I actually think it's a little more sinister than that, right? I think the reality is the systems do not want the left to get together, right? So the government doesn't want all the poor and working people to get along, right? They don't want the unions to work together. They don't want poor people having conversations. So one of the arguments that I find myself having all the time, right, is don't get at me for calling out racism, right? I'm not the problem because I mention it. Racism is the problem. And racism exists so that you can act like an asshole and I can point out that you're acting like an asshole. And you can then say, well, I'm the one with the problem because I've pointed out that you're a racist, right? So All of these things all work in tandem. Everybody's busy talking and arguing and fighting amongst each other about these things that were all created so that we continue to fight and complain and argue with each other, right? Like that's literally why. And I'm sorry, no, my child is in the other room, like playing video games with his friends online. So this is why my internet keeps cutting. But but that's why this is happening. So you have these problems where there could be a conference, right? But who's going to come, right? Is it going to be the people who are willing to set things aside, or is it going to be the people who are going to bring their nonsense ideologies with them to argue with people over nonsense? Because in the end, we can't be fighting the same battle if you don't think I'm deserving of the same thing that you're deserving of, right? Like we can't all be fighting for you to then turn around and say, well, we can have this thing, but you can't actually have it. And I think people really misunderstand how deeply rooted the breaks in this system, the breaks in this society are, and they're deeply rooted and broken because that is how the system wants it, right? That is exactly what is supposed to happen. We are not supposed to get along. We are not supposed to talk. The reason it works on the right is because they all support the government. Like the government don't care if they all get together and hang out and plot to be rich and to, F the poor people. Like, they don't care because they are actually in line with what the system wants them to be in line with. If you get a bunch of poor people together who are willing to set all of that stuff aside and be the actual Rainbow Coalition that the Black Panther Party and Fred Hampton were trying to do, despite what everybody thinks it was that they were trying to do, they are going to have a massive problem because that is when you're going to have actual revolution, right? That is when you're going to have an actual system break. That is actually when you're going to have a full group of mass working, multicultural people working together towards breaking the system. They're not trying to have that. They don't want it. They have no interest in having it happen. And that is why it doesn't happen. So every time you have a group that gets even a little farther ahead, pushing these ideas and these things, these theories that really make sense for common sense people, the government comes in and all of a sudden now all the problems start happening. The fights start happening, right? Like, not for nothing, Black Lives Matter, for as much problems as the organization has, right? The idea of Black Lives Matter still is a thing, right? Like, that's still an issue. It's still a problem. What happened was the government and rich people got involved. And then you have the break. So this is what happens every time. So what I really want to encourage people to do is do the local thing, right? If you really want to support Cornel West and you really want to see this happen, then you should be going to find where is your local Green Party? What are they doing? How do you get involved with the meetings? How do you get people to sign up? How do you get his word out? Can you help fix his website? Like, you know what I mean? Like, let's get those things together. And then we can actually try to have a coalition of working people who are working towards the same end. But you're going to have to be clear. It's not going to happen easy because the government doesn't want it. They don't want to be broken. They don't want to not make money. They don't want to collect money from corporations. They don't give a shit that people are sleeping in the bridges. That's not their issue. They want to keep collecting for their campaigns. So as long as people don't recognize that all of these problems are put in place intentionally to have problems, it's going to be difficult. So people have to find a way to move forward with the understanding that you are working against a system that is literally in place to prevent you from working.
Yeah, and on that lovely optimistic note, no, I'm just kidding. No, I think you're 100% right. I think you're 100% right, Renee. I think that is very true. And you've seen that, I mean, in the past, how did they respond to the rise of the Black Power movement? How did they respond to the rise of the anti-war movement in the 70s? They made a bunch of new laws that put all those people in jail, or they killed them in cold blood, and blamed it on, some third party that, they were never going to convict in court, and that happened over and over and over and over again. And I feel like, honestly, the movement is so disparate that people, think that it can't happen again. And it's really just because of all the reasons you said. It's been beaten down so much that it's not at the, threat level that it was 50, 60, 70 years ago. But I did want to thank you guys so much for coming on and chatting with us a little bit. You guys are two of our absolute favorite guests of the podcast. So lovely and refreshing, even though sometimes depressing, to chat about the state of affairs together. You guys obviously have a permanent home on the Vanguard. We'll get you back in as soon as you'd like to be. But yeah, if you guys have any last things to holler out, we really appreciate you guys coming in and chatting with us.
Yeah, just one final thing I want to say just really quickly is like I feel like one thing the left always says, we don't have enough money to do these things. I think the fear of the government coming after us, the government's coming after us anyway. I'm on the FBI watch list. You can look it up.
Yeah, none of the big streamers want anybody to the IRS to come sniffing too close.
But I mean, I also think that's also an issue. But like I feel like we can't continue to say like, oh, because the government doesn't want us to get together, like we shouldn't or we can't, or we can do whatever the fuck we want to do, whatever we put our minds to, wherever we put our funds to. There are plenty of people on the left, Hassan Piker, Crystal Ball, that have money. You know, they have money. You got Jimmy Dore. You really want to do something, cough up some of them millions, baby, and put on. Let's get this conference popping. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think we need to be more intentional about our organizing. And yeah, if you guys want to follow me or follow the work that I do, you can follow me at Reddit's Ari. I work for an organization called Life After Release. If you want to follow Life After Release, it's literally just at Life After Release on pretty much everything. But yeah, you know, let's get it together. Let's get it together. You feel me?
One, it's so good. I haven't seen Afeni since last year in Maryland, so it's nice to see her again. I know, right? Thanks for having me on. I don't mean to be the realist pig, you know, with the wet blanket. I want people to go after everything, as Afeni just said, with intention, right? If you go after things with a clear mind and with intention, you'd be shocked at how much we can get done. I will note for people in the New Jersey area, I did recently announce that I'll be doing a screening of Reimagining Safety. We'll be doing that in Montclair on July 12th. I just got word that Olay is coming to the panel, so I'm super excited. You know, folks in the New Jersey area or close to New Jersey, keep an eye out. That is my Twitter handle right there, and we'll be doing more announcements and getting some things going. So, you know, I'll see y'all on the backside.
Cool. Well, thank you guys so much for stopping by. Really had a great time chatting. You're welcome back whenever. So please, you know, hit us up if there's anything you want to chat about. And both of you have a great rest of your Tuesday. Cool. We'll see you next time. Yeah, that was an awesome conversation. So glad to catch up with Renee and Afeni. I thought they both had a lot of really interesting thoughts about the Cornel West campaign. I definitely share both some of Renee's reservations, but I also share a lot of Afeni's, you know, optimism and enthusiasm about the West campaign and its potential to reach voters that are disenfranchised, that might not usually turn out to vote. So I think that potential is definitely there, but that Renee is definitely correct to bring up some reservations and to say, you know, that potential exists, but let's make sure that it's actually followed through on, and let's make sure there's actually a serious plan here, because just, you know, the existence of potential can easily be squandered without serious organizing, which is what's necessary for this campaign to have any sort of success whatsoever.